So we've talked about how flu shots are made. We've talked about the eggs, the chemical processing, some of the problems with a couple of the different flu shots, and the reasons why you need to ask what kind of flu shot that is out there, what you may be getting or what your family may be getting. But even with that, we need to talk a little bit about what the potential side effects are from the flu shots, because this is not a shot of vitamin. And this is a medication. It's a medicine. And every medicine has the potential for a side effect. Now, this is a pretty busy looking chart and a pretty busy table. So let me break this down a little bit and tell you why I think this is important when we're talking about flu vaccine side effects. This comes from the CDC. It's a conference call that was done on March 23, 2010, and then there was a table that was involved with it. And this came off of a PowerPoint presentation that was used during that conference call. And this is a VAERS report. VAERS is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. And that is part of the 1986 Vaccine Injury Compensation Table, or Compensation Act, in which all vaccines are reported to this reporting system, and that people who are severely injured have the opportunity to apply for compensation from the government for being injured by a vaccine. So every year, the US government, the FDA, collects data, and anybody can file a VAERS report. An individual person, a doctor, a nurse, a clinician, anybody can file a VAERS report, which is, again, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. So these VAERS reports, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System reports, are collected every year. And these are the reports that came in for the different types of vaccines. So you can see across the top there where it says the vaccine type. H1N1 was the swine flu vaccine, and then this was the seasonal vaccine. Then down the column over there, the live attenuated vaccine, which is flu mist, which is the one that goes up the nose. Those were various flu shots, and then this was the reported reaction that came in. And when somebody reported an adverse event, they didn't report in the form what type of flu shot they actually got it. So that is why that is a fairly complicated and busy looking chart. But to sum it up, what's important about that chart is that in one flu season, there were 16,234 reported reactions to a flu shot. And it's important to keep in mind that not every single reaction is reported, and it's actually estimated that only about 10% of reactions are reported. So this number could be low by like 90%, but these were the ones that were actually reported. Of those that were reported, there were 46 that were fatal, and there were over 605 that were considered non-fatal. So that could have been anywhere from putting you in the hospital to having a sore arm or to having a rash or something like that. What's also important about this is that there were 93 reports of Guillain-Barré syndrome from the swine flu vaccine and 112 reports of Guillain-Barré syndrome from the seasonal vaccine. Now, Guillain-Barré syndrome is a reaction that happens most commonly from flu shots, but it can happen from other vaccines also. It's a reaction that happens to your nervous system, and it can cause what's called ascending paralysis, which means you start with numbness and paralysis that starts in your feet, goes up both limbs, and it can go all the way up to your diaphragm. If it gets to your diaphragm, it paralyzes your diaphragm. You end up on a ventilator or you die. People that end up with Guillain-Barré syndrome generally spend anywhere from 2 days to 6 months in the hospital. Most of the time they're on a ventilator. And many times when they have a very severe case of Guillain-Barré, they ended up in an extended care facility and go through months, sometimes years of rehab, and sometimes they never get complete function back. So this is one of the most severe forms of side effects from a flu shot, and it's not uncommon. Now, the CDC would say, well, based on the total number of flu shots that were given, this number of cases of Guillain-Barré syndrome is statistically insignificant. Doesn't really matter, didn't really count, oh well. But think about all those healthcare dollars that were expended on those few side effects. And those are just the most serious ones. So when you break that down a little bit further, in that particular flu season, up through January of 2010, there were those 125 cases of Guillain-Barré, and at least 64 of them were absolutely confirmed to be caused by a flu shot. Anaphylaxis is shock, that people go into shock and end up in the hospital, and you could die from that. There were 268 cases of that, and 115 that were absolutely verified. And keep in mind that every time they look at these vaccine adverse event reports, it is the job of the FDA and the CDC to track down these reports to see whether or not it was actually caused by the flu shot or could it have been caused by something else. And their modus of looking at is always to disprove that it was caused by a vaccine. They will look at every possible way. And I've testified several times in federal court. I've written some reports in terms of chart reviews, and it is always looked at by the government that they will try every possible excuse to say that any type of side effect or reaction that you have from flu shots or any of the other vaccines, there was always something else. Always something else is what they're looking for, to minimize the number of side effects. So one of the things that happens from these VAERS reports on an annualized basis is that people who are injured and have been verified to have actually been caused by the flu or by the vaccine, they can apply to the government through the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program to get compensation for that. And this is just a quick little slide that I put in that from the vaccine injury claims filed or dismissed from when this started in 1986 to date up through May 5th of 2010, that there were actually 433 cases filed of people who claimed to have had injury from the flu shot, 26 deaths, 144 people have been compensated, 43 were dismissed, said, oh, something happened, wasn't the flu. They dismissed that, and then there are some claims pending. This is a fairly common ratio of about 25% of claims that are filed that the person who ends up getting injured from a vaccine actually gets some level of compensation. And that injury compensation program was set up because we know that vaccines cause side effects. We know that they can cause injury and death. And so the government looks at it as you sacrificed yourself for the good of the whole and you got our vaccine, and if you got a reaction, then we should compensate you for that. But they try every possible way to dismiss as many cases as they can. And these were the number of cases of flus that had actually been compensated. Again, documenting that these are not benign, that people do have serious reactions. Some people do die from this, and some people actually are so severely injured from a flu shot that they actually have received compensation from the government because of the level of injury that they received from a flu shot. Part of the reason that there are issues with flu shots have to do with that long list of ingredients that we talked about earlier in the presentation. And so we're going to go through some of these ingredients and show you some of the problems that have been found from these things that are all listed on the package inserts. The first one is something called Triton X100, which another name for it may be listed on the package insert as octoxanol 10. It's a detergent. They use it sometimes in paints, and they use it in manufacturing chemicals. And the reason that they use it in influenza vaccines and in processing influenza viruses is that the chemical can shake up the virus and separate the vaccine antigens of that H and the N on the surface of the virus. This chemical is known to alter metabolic activity of cells in humans, can damage cellular membranes, and can cause rapid decline of cellular function. It's also a known mitochondrial disruptor. And when I looked at this and I looked through the scientific literature, not necessarily the medical literature, but the scientific literature and looked at this, I had to actually question in my mind that one of the things that they're talking about now with all these children with autism and all these other types of neurodegenerative diseases, they're all labeling them as mitochondrial disorders. That is a relatively new classification of illness that's only been out probably less than 10 years, that they've really started doing things and looking at that. So I have to question. So we've been giving flu shots since the 1930s to adults, and every year we expand the number of people that are getting these flu shots. We've been getting flu shots to children since 2004. That's been 6 years. How many of those children now are diagnosed with mitochondrial disorders? And could any of it be linked back to using Triton X100 in the flu shots and some of the other viral vaccines in which Triton X100 is used to shake those viruses apart? There's another ingredient called polysorbate 80. Polysorbate 80, it can cause anaphylactic reactions if it's given repeatedly. It can cause infertility. It's been shown to cause infertility in female mice. It causes the ovaries in the mice to atrophy, and it causes ovary in the testicles of the male mice to atrophy. And yet polysorbate 80 is in flu shots. It's also in the Gardasil vaccine. It's been shown to facilitate passage of drugs across the blood-brain barrier. And in this particular article, they were using it to take a drug to stop diarrhea across the blood-brain barrier and into the brain. So there is now other types of chemical processing in the works. There's other types of chemical processing in the works to use polysorbate 80 to facilitate drugs across the blood-brain barrier. Well, if polysorbate 80 is in a vaccine, is it facilitating some of the other ingredients in the vaccine to cross the blood-brain barrier, including mercury? And it is a component of MF59, which is an adjuvant we're going to talk about in more detail in just a couple of minutes. Another problematic ingredient is formaldehyde. It's the US EPA allows no more than 0.016 parts per million of formaldehyde in the air of new buildings, a negligible amount. And the reason is because the symptoms of tearing and irritation of your eyes, nose, and your throat can occur at 3 parts per million. That's when you can start smelling formaldehyde. Sometimes you know formaldehyde outgassing because of new carpeting or new cabinetry in a new house. That's what a lot of what you're smelling is that formaldehyde. NIOSH, which is the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, states that formaldehyde is immediately dangerous to life and health at 20 parts per million. That's not very much. And in the body, formaldehyde can cause proteins and irreversibly bind to DNA, and it's a known carcinogen. Now, many people have said, who are really the pro-vaccine people, say, well, formaldehyde is just a couple of carbon atoms and a couple of hydrogen atoms, and your body sort of can metabolize that out, no big deal. But if you had a little syringe of formaldehyde and I walked up to inject it in some of those pro-vaccine people who say it's no big deal, you think they'd want it injected? I don't think so. We use formaldehyde when we do autopsies. We do in dead people. We use formaldehyde to process the body. We don't want that in our system. And as a matter of fact, flu shots have a lot of formaldehyde. And it's kind of hidden in the package inserts because it will actually list that each of those different types of flu vaccines have that many, like 25 micrograms per dose. But when you do the math and you find out that 25 micrograms is 50 parts per million, which is more than double what is said to be immediately dangerous to health, why is it that we're injecting all of this into kids? Formaldehyde is also found in polio vaccines. And now we've got it in all of these flu shots, and we're doing this in every infant, in every child, starting at 6 months of age and annually for the rest of their life. These are all the vaccines that have formaldehyde in them: DPTs, Hib, flu, polio, hepatitis A, hepatitis Bs, meningitis, some of the combination vaccines. And keep in mind that children get multiple doses of each of these vaccines. So they're getting multiple doses of formaldehyde each time they get one of these shots. Another problematic ingredient is alpha tocopherol succinate, which is a long chemical name for vitamin E. Now, a lot of people would say, well, geez, there's a vitamin. We're injecting vitamin E. Isn't that something that's probably good? Well, when you take something in as a food and you digest it through your system, it's a very different reaction than when you inject it into your body. Injecting vitamin E acts as a very strong immunomodulator. It hyperstimulates the immune system, directly impacting the immune system, especially in the elderly. The succinate form is preferred because it increases the cytokine responses and increases antibody production. So the reason that they say that they want to increase this in people is because they want all those antibodies produced. Vitamin E in vaccines also acts as a preservative, and sometimes they're using it in some of the flu shots as an alternative to thimerosal, which is the mercury. Gelatin. Now, why is gelatin in there? Well, gelatin is in the vaccines as a stabilizer because now that we've taken the viruses, we've treated it with detergent, we've separated those antigens, we want those antigens to stay apart so that we can create an antibody to those antigens on the surface of the virus. There's a strong relationship between systemic allergic reactions, including anaphylaxis, and the presence of gelatin. And allergic cross-reactions also occur to gelatin-containing foods. And this came from a study that says, the title of the study is Food Allergy to Gelatin in Children with Systemic Reactions, including Anaphylaxis from Vaccines. So we know that the vaccines that get injected have gelatin in it. The gelatin now creates an antibody. That antibody can cross-react to foods with gelatin, and people now that when they eat foods with gelatin, they can have a food reaction or an anaphylactic reaction. And the epidemic of allergies, asthma, food allergies that are going on in this country in children is just epidemic proportions. That in my opinion, I think a lot of it has to do with the gelatin and these other chemicals in these vaccines. As a matter of fact, look at the number of vaccines that have gelatin in them. These are microgram amounts of gelatin in all these different vaccines. But when you get down into here, those are actually milligram amounts. 12,500 micrograms is 12.5 milligrams. That's like if you took sugar and put it on a little scale, you could weigh it. That's how much is actually dissolved into those vaccines. So when you get a dose of chickenpox vaccine, 2 MMR vaccines, this is Zostavax, this is the shingles vaccine that has the highest amount. You get multiple doses every single year of these flu shots. You get at least 5 doses of DPT. There is a ton of gelatin being injected into children that can cross-react into food allergies and other types of systemic problems. Now, here's another interesting chemical. It's called sodium deoxycholate. They call it DC for short. This is another detergent, and it's used like Triton X100 to break apart those viral antigens. It's actually a stronger detergent than Triton X100. Research now clearly shows that sodium deoxycholate promotes development of breast cancer tumors and promotes breast cancer metastasis both in a petri dish, in vitro, and in vivo in a living body. But yet we're injecting microgram amounts of this detergent into little babies and annually from thereafter. And what about the epidemic of breast cancer that we're having these days and all the adult women that are getting flu shots? Fortunately, this is not used a lot. It's only used in a couple of the flu shots. One is Fluarix, but it is in some of the other vaccines that can be injected into people as they get older. Deoxycholate has also been known to be a promoter of colon cancer in human cells. If there's even a slight possibility that this can cause cancer, why are we using it? Why should it be in there? And why should we be promoting this in any vaccines, even if they are only in certain vaccines? This should not be allowed. This is stuff that comes out of the medical literature showing unequivocally that some of these chemicals are leading to the epidemic of cancer we're having in this country, in my opinion. These are the shots. These are the shots that actually have the deoxycholate in it. Fluarix, FluMist, all of the swine flu shots that everybody got in 2009, all of them have that chemical in it. The hepatitis B vaccine and one of the meningitis vaccines called Menimmune that actually has that chemical in it that we are injecting into our population. Now, what about mercury? I certainly don't have time to go into all of the science and all of the details of everything that has to do with thimerosal and mercury, because that could be another 2 hours just in and of itself. But we are under this perception that mercury is out of all of the vaccines. It's not. It is absolutely not. Some of the vaccines still contain thimerosal, which can break down into the body into ethyl mercury and thiosalicylic acid. The multi-dose flu vials contain 25 micrograms per shot. And those are the flu shots. And this is another reason why when you go, if you decide to get a flu shot or someone in your family is going to get a flu shot or you're forced to get a flu shot through your job like healthcare workers or the military, you need to know what dose, what vaccine that they're using and what they may be injecting into your body. Each one of those vials, if that comes in a full vial, there's 10 doses generally in a vial, and they're supposed to be shaken each time they give you one. And if they're not, that mercury's a heavy metal. It'll settle right to the bottom of the vial. So people that are getting the last parts of that shot may be getting more than 25 micrograms per dose. There's a trace amount of mercury left in FLU-zone in that particular prepackaged syringe. So, and I just put that up there because I found that kind of be interesting, that molecule over to the side is the chemical molecule of what mercury looks like. And they came up with the name thimerosal because thi in chemistry is sulfur, which is the S, the mer from the Hg, which is mercury, and the rest of it is the salicylic acid, which is like an aspirin. And so that's how they came up with that name, and that's the chemical compound, and that's what's getting injected into your body. Mercury is accepted as a known neurotoxin everywhere in the world except apparently in the human body. When we inject it in vaccines, doesn't matter. We put it in fillings in your mouth, doesn't matter. But everywhere else in the world, it is measured in parts per billion that we should avoid it. Prior to 2001, children had received up to 237.5 micrograms of mercury in their vaccination series. Amazing, absolutely amazing. And a component, as I've already mentioned, is this salicylate, which is an aspirin. Foods containing natural salicylate are not identical with aspirin, but they are similar enough to induce reactions. So if people have aspirin sensitivities, they have to avoid foods with salicylate in them. Foods that are high in salicylate, this is a partial list. There's lots of fruits and berries and apples, coffees and all teas, tomatoes, olives, broccoli, and other vegetables, almonds, water chestnuts, and peanuts. So could it be that by using these multi-dose flu shots and putting mercury into all of these kids all these years is one of the base things that have been creating some of these cross-reactivities to all of these epidemic of peanut allergies that we're seeing now? We're seeing gelatin and peanuts, or I'm sorry, gelatin and thimerosal being injected into all of these kids, causing these massive food allergies. Now, what about mercury in vaccines versus tuna? You know, because they say that, you know, there's a whole big issue. I mean, we measure mercury everywhere and say that you shouldn't have it, but it's okay in a vaccine. March of 2004, nearly all fish and shellfish contain traces of mercury, and the FDA and the EPA first advised women who may become pregnant, who are pregnant, or are nursing, or young children that they should avoid some types of fish and shellfish that might be high in mercury. Japanese government has restricted fish consumption to species that have less than 0.3 micrograms of mercury per gram of fish. The FDA says that safe levels is really less than 1 microgram of mercury per gram of fish. But there's 25 micrograms per dose in a vaccine. Wow. It's okay to inject it. It's okay when it's in a vaccine. It's okay when it's in a filling in your mouth. But heaven forbid you eat fish that even have the slightest little trace of mercury in it. These are, I just put this up here for your information, that these are the types of fish that are considered high, moderate, and low content of mercury. And a lot of that has to do with the type of fish and the fat in the fish. Some of the high content fish, they have a lot of fat marbled through their meat. The heavy metals get stored into the fat in the fish, and that's why they have a higher content of mercury in those types of fish. Failure to expose the amount of mercury in fish to the public is a game of roulette and leaves the heavy fish consumer at risk for excess mercury and adverse health effects. Scientists from the EPA estimate that as many as 600,000 babies are born each year at risk of neurological and developmental problems because their mothers have high blood mercury levels from fish consumption. But they take not a speck of interest in kids who may have high mercury levels from vaccines. There's another unrecognized problem that goes on with vaccines. So the main ones that I've talked about are things like polysorbate 80 and gelatin and thimerosal. But this one, I think, is a huge hidden risk that I've only recently begun talking about, and that's latex. Prior to 2006, almost every vaccine had latex listed on a package insert as a vaccine ingredient. In fact, it said things like this: vaccine package insert warning, the stopper to the vial of this product contains dry, natural latex rubber that may cause allergic reactions. By 6 months of age, fully vaccinated children have received 19 injections and 19 potential bits of latex from those stoppers. Tiny exposures can have a huge effect. You know, so many times the people who really push vaccines and the whole pro-vaccine movement says, oh, it's so tiny it doesn't really matter and it really doesn't have any reaction at all. But think about the drop of a bee venom and how little that is, but yet can cause anaphylactic shock and people can die from it. It only takes a teeny tiny particle in order to cause a serious reaction. Synthetic non-latex rubber has been used since, the natural rubber has been used since in stoppers on medications since pre-1940s. But in the early 1940s, a synthetic pharmaceutical grade butyl rubber became available for stoppers. And since the 1960s, halogenated synthetic rubber called gray butyl rubber has been in the worldwide choice of pharmaceutical grade stoppers for 40 years. And I just have to tell you a little side, digging that information out of the medical literature and the scientific information, that and the next slide I'm going to show you was about 12 hours of work. This isn't readily available for people to know. But it is very important to know that for more than 40 years, we have had a synthetic, non-allergenic type of rubber stopper available for use in medical use, and we have not used it. This is the list of vaccine stoppers as of May 2010. This is the list that still have latex, and this is the list that have synthetic stoppers. And some vaccines are listed on both lists because of the way that they're packaged. Some of them in the multi-dose vials will have latex stoppers, and some of them that are individually packaged will have synthetic stoppers. And at first, when I started researching this, my whole area of concern was about the synthetic stoppers, thinking, geez, are we injecting some sort of weird chemical into these kids in addition to the synthetic stoppers? But after I went through 12 to 14 hours worth of research and read tons of information, the real problem has to do with the natural latex stoppers because of the risk of allergic reaction. You combine the latex with thimerosal, with gelatin, with polysorbate 80, with sodium deoxycholate, with all those other chemicals. We are just asking for more disasters with this. And what's really aggravating to me about this is that there has been something safer available to be used with these vaccines. Not safe, but definitely safer for 40 years. And the drug companies still use latex stoppers in all those vaccines. Another reason why, even on those vaccines, you definitely need to be looking at the package inserts. And what about these adjuvants? And what else is happening into these vaccines that are causing more problems? Well, an adjuvant is a substance added to produce a high antibody response. And the first adjuvants were used in 1925 by a French researcher that he found by adding breadcrumbs, agar, tapioca starch, and oil to vaccines could increase the antibody response when they injected diphtheria or tetanus. Could you imagine injecting tapioca into your arm to make sure that you get a high antibody response? The only adjuvants currently licensed in the U.S. are from alum, or they're made from aluminum. And those are the 4 different types of aluminum that are used in different types of vaccines. I'm not going to go into a lot of the things about aluminum, primarily because right now we're talking about flu and flu shots, and aluminum is not used currently in any of the flu vaccines. But there are huge amounts of aluminum in all of the other vaccines that we'll talk about some other time. There are new candidate adjuvants that are coming down the pike, and they're made from things like walls from bacteria. They're being made from bacterial walls from salmonella. And they're using immunostimulating complexes and bacterial toxins and aliphatic amines and lysosomes, all this chemical junk being injected into your body just to make sure you get an antibody. Oh my. And the 2 that they're already been approved and been using, one is called ASO3, made by GlaxoSmithKline. It's an oil-based adjuvant that has squalene, alpha-tocopherol, which is the vitamin E that we talked about, and polysorbate 80 in large amounts, milligram amounts. And it has already been approved for use in one of the flu vaccines that's being used in Canada. The other one is MF59, made by Novartis. It also has an oil-based adjuvant, which has squalene, polysorbate 80, and something called SPAN 85, which is another detergent. And look, that's being used in a flu shot that's already been approved for use in Europe, and they've been using it in children for several years. Now, what is the squalene thing? People talk about squalene a lot, and we were very concerned during the period of time of the swine flu that they were going to put squalene into that vaccine. Well, squalene is a molecule that's found in foods and eggs and olives and many types of topical products because it's an oil, and it makes things slippery. The molecule also occurs normally in the human body, and it's a precursor to cholesterol and to some of our hormones. It's on the surface of most cells, particularly the cells of the nervous system, like the surface of your nerves and the surface of your brain. Squalene droplets in a vaccine, once they've been injected, are picked up by white blood cells and other immune cells, and they're transported off into your lymph nodes, where antibodies are made against them. And the problem is that squalene antibodies can potentially cross-react with the squalene in your body, leading to debilitating autoimmune and nervous system diseases. There's been one study, that came out that said, oh, that's not true. It was a very small population, and of course, every time that there's a problem that's found with a vaccine or a vaccine ingredient, the pharmaceutical industry rallies really quickly and tries to populate the medical literature with things to counter it. But even if there is one study that said that it's not true, not knowing the information doesn't mean that it's not true. And why would they even take a risk of being able to put that into bodies to create the massive amounts of debilitating autoimmune disease that we're seeing these days. Rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, mitochondrial issues, all sorts of things are coming from these, potentially coming from these things injected through vaccines. More than 24 peer-reviewed scientific papers from 10 laboratories all around the world documented autoimmune disease in animals after they were injected with squalene. Even 10 parts per billion, teeny tiny amounts of squalene, translates into approximately 184 trillion molecules of squalene and an equal number of potentially destructive immune responses. Why even risk it? Why even bother? Adjuvants are capable of accelerating the immune system. And once it's accelerated, once you've turned it on, there's no off switch. You can't go in and go, oops, take out the squalene, sorry, didn't mean to make that happen. The long-term effects are really unknown and are likely to be left unknown because nobody really is interested in that. What we're interested in is injecting something and do you get an antibody? Does the antibody work? Does it harm you? We don't care, as long as we inject it in you and you get an antibody. And after more than 75 years of use, researchers admit that the mechanism of action for most adjuvants is still, quote, incompletely understood. And this comes from this was a workshop. Each one of those PDF files were over 1,000 pages that I read through to look at all the research that's being come from all these different types of adjuvants, and what they are planning for us coming down the road with these vaccines is just horrendous. Side effects include things like this: fever, much like the flu, anaphylaxis, immune suppression, causing cancer, associated with birth defects, causing abortions. This is what's being injected in order to accelerate the immune system and for you to create an antibody against whatever vaccine-preventable disease is injected into you from that syringe. So we're going to go now into some specific questions that I've gotten and some answers about things that have come up about flu and the flu shot. These have come to me through emails and through my Facebook page and through our website. So I want to address some of these questions and give some answers specifically. For one, is I got the flu once upon a time and I was really sick. Now am I immune? I mean, if I get, you know, something like pertussis, or if I get something like measles, particularly measles, if I've gotten measles, am I immune? And I have chicken pox? I've gotten chicken pox, so I don't have to, I'm immune. If I've gotten the flu, am I immune? Well, let's see. Immunity to the flu and the swine flu. There were two reports that I found. One is that during the regular flu season, if the H antigen, if you get a blood test for a titer for the flu, and your level is greater than 1 to 40, that's a mathematical ratio that they use in the laboratory, it's been correlated with the fact that you have a decreased incidence of getting an influenza-like illness from the flu. So that means that those antibodies hang around for a while. And when you had swine flu, this was a study that came out just recently, where it said that recovery from illness, 90% of patients had an antibody titer greater than 1 to 40, assumed to be a level that can prevent illness when re-exposed to the virus. So 90% of the time, if you had swine flu during that season, you have a 90% chance that if you're re-exposed to a swine flu virus, the chance of you getting the flu is low. Now, pro-vaccine people would say, oh, but those antigens shift every year, and that's why you have to give different vaccines and why we have to have an exact match. But the truth of the matter is, even these researchers say that the antibodies can cross-react. And if they can cross-react and protect you because you've had previous flu vaccines or because you've previously had the flu, why do you have to keep getting the flu shot? Nobody has a really good answer for that. Because the truth about titers is that they know that at 1 to 40, it's assumed to be adequate to protect you. However, people with lower titers didn't get the flu. People with higher titers did get the flu. So what does these titer things really mean? Pre-existing immunity to seasonal influenza viruses, either through vaccination or actually getting the flu, can provide cross-protection in a pandemic. Well, now they say, if you've had a flu shot or the flu before and this pandemic thing comes, you don't really need a flu shot because maybe it can cross-react. In their own house is conflicting information. In my opinion, knowing what's in those flu shots, I'd rather take my chances with the flu. Because if I get the flu, chances are I'm not going to get it again. And if I got the shot, am I more likely to get the flu? Which was another question I got. And it's like, gosh, if you get the shot, you're supposed to not get it. Does it make you more susceptible because somehow the flu shot weakens your immune system? Well, actually, that is true. Flu shots and getting the flu. There were 4 Canadian studies involving about 2,000 people that when they received the flu shot, they were more likely to get sick with the pandemic strain of the virus. Researchers found that seasonal flu vaccine was associated with a 1.4 to 5 times greater risk of getting swine flu if you had the flu shot. The study raised questions about the biological interactions between the effects of the flu shot on the immune system. They really don't know. Do flu shots make a person more susceptible to the flu? Do antibodies mean anything at all? In my opinion, all an antibody means is that something's been injected into your body and your immune system reacted. Does it keep you from getting sick? Nobody really knows for sure. They think maybe, but they don't know, because people can have high titers and still get sick in any one of the vaccine-related illnesses. We do know that those antibodies can cross-react and cause other types of autoimmune problems. So antibodies, we don't know. And what about Tamiflu? I mean, that is like the big thing. You get sick, oh my gosh, you have to run to the doctor and get a pill. Well, approved in 1999, Tamiflu is only effective against culture-confirmed influenza. Severe respiratory problems from influenza are usually due to bacterial co-infections from staph strep or MRSA, which is methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. So that's another type of staph infection that is resistant to antibiotics. Tamiflu is only effective if you give it within the first 2 days of symptoms. Now, how many people that start to get the symptoms of the flu run right off to the doctor and get culture confirmed to make sure they can take their Tamiflu? Like none. So by the time you even go to the doctor because you're sick, you've probably been sick 3 or 4 days, most of the time they don't even confirm that it actually is influenza that they have, and they just give you a pill, which doesn't work. And it's not likely to be effective if the patient has already had flu symptoms for several days. And oh, by the way, if you did run to the doctor and get culture confirmed and get your Tamiflu, your symptoms will be 1.3 days less than if you didn't take Tamiflu at all. And what about all the side effects from Tamiflu? There was a study that was published in 2005 of over 1,100 case reports that included 75 children that had 32 neuropsychiatric events, 8 fatalities, 12 skin hypersensitivity events, and 1 case of pancreatitis and cardiac arrest that was associated with Tamiflu. So in order to decrease your symptoms by a day, this is some of the risk that you may entail. During the 2007 and 2008 flu season, resistant H1N1 viruses began to appear all over the world. The following year, essentially all seasonal H1N1 influenza viruses were resistant to Tamiflu. All of them. All of them. So it didn't work. Tamiflu-resistant viruses are capable of replicating and spreading all around the world. So sensitivity testing has discovered that viruses treated with Tamiflu are 300-fold to 1,000,000-fold more resistant to Tamiflu than untreated viruses. So now, are we actually causing these mutant viruses? And the FDA has actually been hammering Roche about this, because saying, is your drug creating these mutant viruses that are never before seen out in the environment? And are those viruses actually going to be causing more problems? And so in a way, could flu shots and Tamiflu be contributing to the evolution of a true pandemic? Because we've got these mutant viruses now that are causing problems and are resistant to everything. How do we get out of this? Okay, so we've talked about how disgusting these things are. And why would you ever want any of this junk injected in your body? Is there any way to not get a flu shot? Well, for school exemptions, there are 3 types of exemptions. There's a medical exemption available in all 50 states. Sadly enough, it's mostly difficult to attain, and it's usually only after you've had a reaction to a shot. And most of the time, it's just you can get an exemption to just that shot. And in many counties across the country, even if your doctor writes a medical exemption, the health examiner for that county has a right to override it. They don't know anything about you, your child, your history, your medical history. They're not your doctor, but because they are a public health official, they have a right to override your doctor's medical exemption for you. Religious exemptions can be more difficult in some states than in others. They are not available in West Virginia or Mississippi. In fact, West Virginia and Mississippi only have medical exemptions, and it's really hard to get out of vaccinating in either of those 2 states. As of July 2010, there are 19 states that allow exemption to vaccination based on philosophical belief, which means that you've looked at the risk of illness, you've looked at the risk of the vaccine, and you said, I'm going to take my chance with the risk of the illness because I can control that. I can control what my kids eat, what they do, what time they go to bed, the vitamins they take. I have some control over whether or not my child can get sick. I have zero control over what happens to their body once something gets injected into it. None, zero. It's a crapshoot. You have no idea what's going to happen. So there are 19 states. These are the states in which you can just simply say no. There's going to become a more and more difficult time for hospital workers because right now it's harder and harder for healthcare workers to refuse, and as time goes on, they're really going to push the flu shot onto healthcare workers contingent with employment. Right now, an estimated 60% of workers in pediatrics and maternity and ICU received the swine flu shot in the 2009-2010 season. On average, 9% of workers refused the seasonal flu vaccine for non-medical reasons. I mean, I just don't want it. I've watched this DVD. I know what's in that stuff, and I don't want to get it. So 9% said, I don't want it, and it wasn't because they had some other illness. About 56% of workers refused the H1N1 swine flu vaccine for non-medical reasons, thinking it was ridiculous, they didn't want it, they thought it was silly because they already had a seasonal flu shot. Those numbers are pretty substantial, I think. I think that probably 10 years ago, most people got flu shots just because they did. They just, they're in the healthcare system. But will the right to refuse be allowed in the future? There are some trial balloons that are going up for mandates for healthcare workers. Here was one study that was a random survey of 585 healthcare workers, including physicians, nurses, and other hospital employees. 70% of those thought influenza vaccination should be mandatory for everyone that works in a hospital system. Even if you're in administration and you have no patient contact and you're nowhere close to patients, that should be mandatory for all who did not have an absolute medical contraindication, and the medical contraindications are few. You've had a reaction to a flu shot before. Sometimes you can get away with saying that you're allergic to eggs, but now they're actually saying you can get skin tested with the flu shot to see if you react, and if you don't react, we'll just give you the flu shot anyways, even if you previously were anaphylactic to eggs. A 5-year study in a large medical center assessed the results of requiring all healthcare workers to receive an influenza shot. Healthcare workers who were granted an accommodation for medical or religious reasons were required to wear a mask to work during the influenza season. The conclusion, mandatory flu vaccination programs are possible, and when implemented, the results are extremely high vaccination rates that can be sustained over several years. The reason that they're really pushing on healthcare workers here is because if they really push doctors and nurses to get it, the doctors and nurses are more likely to push their patients. And that's really what's behind the whole system, that whole situation. And doctors think that we should get it. In a survey of 560 physicians, half of them responded. Of those that responded, 84.6% supported mandatory flu vaccines for all healthcare workers. And in 2002, even the American Medical Association advocated the following. Since religious and philosophical exemptions endanger not only the health of the unvaccinated individual, those 15% of virus out there in circulation, you're really at risk at those, but also the health of those in his or her practice group and the community at large. The AMA encourages state medical associations to seek removal of such exemptions and statutes requiring mandatory immunizations. This isn't just about flu shots. This is trying to do away with all exemptions for all reasons, for all vaccines in all states. And if we aren't vigilant as a population, for those of us that think that our personal right to refuse should stop at the level of our skin, if we aren't vigilant and stay on top of these laws and start to educate more and more people, including doctors and nurses who should look at this information and know what they're injecting into patients and what they're being allowed to be injected into themselves, we're going to lose our rights to refuse someday, somewhere, somehow. So this is the American Medical Association is pushing that and have been pushing it. It's been part of their agenda for a long time. Now, what about homeschooled kids? I think that there's a lot of parents out there that homeschool their kids for a lot of reasons, and one of which is that there's some parents that homeschool their children because they don't want to have to put up with the school shot stuff in the school systems, and particularly those states like New York and New Jersey and West Virginia and Mississippi, where getting an exemption to get into public school is really hard. Since there is no consistent regulation on vaccination, public health journals are now filling up with articles like this, and this is one example that I pulled out for the sake of this presentation. It's widely unknown whether the nearly 2 million homeschooled children are adequately immunized. There is no consistent regulation in place to monitor the immunization status of the ever-growing homeschooled population. Therefore, states should enact the same laws as those used for public school students to assess vaccination status at the time of registration. Meaning, just like going to public school now, we have to submit a completed vaccination record or an exemption letter, and you would have to be able to submit a completed vaccination record. States should enforce neglect petitions. There are some states that think if you don't vaccinate your children, it's considered medical neglect and child abuse. So they are advocating to force that on parents and to really enforce negligence petitions and require children to be vaccinated before they're allowed to participate in any school-sponsored programs like track, baseball, whatever sorts of things that those kids, homeschooled kids, do for socialization. This is coming. This is one of many articles like that being peppered into the healthcare literature as we speak. So is mandatory vaccination even possible? Well, it was been laid the background for that. It started by step number 1, name the agent and the rules. In 1946, we established the U.S. Public Health Service, and by Executive Order 9708, we listed the communicable diseases that we could control by the use of quarantine. By 1983, those are the list of diseases we could use quarantine for to stop the spread. In April 2003, SARS was added to that list. In April 2005, we amended it and said that now influenza caused by a novel or reemergent influenza virus that are causing or having the potential to cause a pandemic. Now we can quarantine people. Well, maybe that's a little bit better than getting a shot, but maybe what if you're mandatorily quarantined? The power to quarantine was delegated to the Secretary of Health and Human Services to be used at his or her discretion, and that Secretary of HHS can arrange for the apprehension and examination of persons reasonably thought to be infected. Reasonably thought to be? Because I sneezed? Because I have a little sinus stuff? I could be apprehended and examined? A cough or a fever could put a person at risk for being quarantined for an extended period without recourse. That's on the books as an executive order. The second step was to define authority and create unlimited funding. So in January 2003, Project BioShield was introduced during President Bush's State of the Union address. It created a permanent, indefinite funding to develop medical countermeasures. Money forever, just keep developing countermeasures. The new authority was given to the NIH to speed research and development and release new drugs and vaccines. Emergency and priority approval was given to fast-track drugs and vaccines whenever they thought they were needed. And then we gave drug companies complete immunity. And so then in December of 2006, long after the House committee had gone home and, for the Christmas holidays and had signed off on their defense appropriation bill, Division E, Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act, was passed at 11:30 at night. Nobody left around. The ones that were there voted to pass it. This was a 40-page document that was tacked on to H.R. 2863, which was the 2006 Department of Defense Appropriations Bill. And what did that provide? Liability for all drugs, vaccines, and biological products deemed to be covered countermeasure for an outbreak of any kind, the flu, measles, anything. Protection of any product and any public health emergency declared by the HHS. Protection from all accountability and all lawsuits, no matter what problems the products caused, even if the drug company knowingly harms someone and people die. So now we're waiting for the timing to occur. We've got all the bills in place. So the only thing that we can do to really stop this is be vigilant. Let people know this information. Get out, get active, get involved, and know that vaccination should be a personal right, and you need to be aware of what's coming down the pike towards you and your family. So how can I stay healthy without flu shots? Well, hand washing is the key to everything. It really works. When washing hands, wet your hands, let it run through warm, lots of soapy suds, wash for 20 seconds. Sometimes they recommend saying happy birthday to yourself twice through, that's 20 seconds. Rinse well under running water. Use a hairdryer, and if possible, if you've used a paper towel, use the paper towel to turn off the water spigot and open the door if you're leaving a public bathroom. When should you wash your hands? Before eating, going to the bathroom, changing a diaper, tending to someone that's sick, after handling animal waste, after handling animal food, and after handling the garbage. Wow, those were tips from the CDC. So if those work for influenza, don't they work for all the rest of the vaccine-preventable diseases too? Just to do some vigilant things in terms of personal hygiene. And then there's the whole issue of vitamin D3, which in the last year or two, there's been an enormous amount of research that's come out how vitamin D3 is beneficial to absolutely every organ system in your body. It's particularly important for increasing your immune system and boosting your resistance to influenza and influenza-like illnesses. Vitamin D as a supplement is the best way to reduce your incidence of influenza A and all the rest of those influenza-like illnesses not caused by influenza A. I'm recommending to all of my patients and to all of you listening to this and people on the website and on Facebook that right around the time of daylight savings time change, to have your 25-hydroxy vitamin D level checked. And for all groups, it should be at least 50 nanograms per ml. So make sure when you get your blood test back or your doctor orders it for you, you get a copy of it and look at the number. Because the range will come back at 30 to 100. You may have 31, and your office may call you and say your range is normal. It's not normal. It needs to be at least 50 for your body to start storing it through the winter time, and it should be somewhere between 80 and 100 to get the maximal beneficial effects of vitamin D. These are the doses for different age groups. Even infants, even newborns can take 1,000 IUs a day. I've had some mothers tell me that they breastfeed outside in the sunshine just so that their babies can get exposed to the sunshine. Between 2 and 5 years of age, we recommend about 35 IUs per pound per day. Age 5 to 12, about 25 IUs per pound per day. And if your 10-year-old is about the size of a 15-year-old, you can go ahead and use a higher dose. Pregnant women can safely use at least 5,000 units a day, but truly, the only way to really know what is the best recommended dose for you is to get a blood test. You really should get a blood test, and I say at least twice a year, right around the time zone change and maybe in the spring. And sometimes you may need 4 to 5 times the amounts that's recommended. The only people that need to be cautious about vitamin D in the medical literature are people that have some forms of cancer and people that have something called sarcoidosis. And if you have either one of those before taking these recommendations, you need to discuss your vitamin D taking and your vitamin D levels with your physician. So the flu and you, preventing and treating the flu naturally. You have the flu, stay home. Don't get on the bus, don't get on the plane, stay home. And know the importance of fever. Fever is a really important thing. It's there trying to burn off the bugs that have somehow invaded into your body. There's a really good article that I wrote called The Importance of Fever that's on our website. So I encourage all of you to go take a look at that article, The Importance of Fever. It's free. Just go out, download it, print it out, hand it out to all your friends and neighbors. Take it to your church, take it to your daycare. Fever isn't something we should run away from. Fever is something that we need to do to keep people comfortable, but we need to let it burn. We need to let it do its job. Cover your mouth when you cough, wash your hands, drink plenty of water, preferably alkaline water. We're real big fans of alkaline water. Getting adequate rest, I can't say that enough, how important it is to get plenty of sleep, particularly with your kids. And I always tell parents, set a bedtime and stick with it and make them go to bed. Not only is it good for your kids' immune system and their adrenals, but you need them out of your hair for a while. You need them to go to bed. You need some adult time with your spouse. You need to have some adult conversation with your kids out of the room and make them go to bed. It's the best thing that you can do. Exercise, every single step counts. Eat diets rich in vitamins and minerals. I always say avoid the great whites, which are white sugar, white flour, white cow's milk, and white rice. Let me do that again. I always say to avoid the 4 great whites, white sugar, white flour, white cow's milk, and white rice. Those are really important. All they are is empty calories. They suppress your immune system, and they do nothing for you but make you gain weight and suppress your immune system. Take good quality supplements. I think that's really important to understand that you get what you pay for. Yes, you can get cheap vitamins at Walmart and at Costco and places like that, but you get what you pay for when it comes to vitamins because vitamins are treated as a food. So you get what you pay for in food. You know you pay a little more money for organic. It's better for you. You don't have as much pesticides. You may still have some, but you won't have as much. The same thing with vitamins. You're going to get what you pay for. Try to get something in a capsule or a liquid instead of a tablet, and because you can absorb those better. Stock up on homeopathics, colloidal silver, vitamin D, powdered vitamin C, oregano oil, olive leaf extracts. All of those things are available. There's tons of information available through our website and our store. All of those things, there's easily accessible information about those out on the internet that you can learn how to do these things for yourself at home. Lower your stress level, walk, exercise, meditate, pray, do whatever spiritual things that need to be important, because we have a spiritual essence about us, and that needs to be attended to also. And consider regular chiropractic or osteopathic adjustments, because that aligning of the spine helps to keep all of your body healthier and helps to move some of the stagnant lymphatics throughout your system. So, I'm hoping that this presentation has changed your way of thinking about flu shots. And if you had any question at all about whether or not you should get a flu shot, whether or not flu shots could cause you harm, whether they actually even protected you from getting the flu, I hope that your paradigm has shifted by watching this presentation and that you'll be able to share it with a lot of your friends and family. What you need to do is just say no. And if you want more information by me on all of the different products that we have about vaccines, these are available all through our website. Vaccine basics, vaccines, the risk-benefit choices, what the CDC and science documents reveals, vaccine developers, and the one in the middle there is about Gardasil and the history of mandatory vaccination. This is the book that I wrote, Saying No to Vaccines, and it refutes the 25 most common reasons people think you should vaccinate. It reads cover to cover, but you can actually read it in sections, and you can go down the table of contents and look for the argument that you're trying to refute and go directly to that page. Make a copy of it with the reference right in the table. You can make a copy of it with the reference right embedded into the text and hand it out to the people that you're arguing with. I wrote this in 2005. It was really about the bird flu, but there's really good chapters in here that go into even more detail than I said in this presentation about the flu. So I want to thank you for allowing me to spend 2 hours with you on the presentation about the flu and flu shots. I hope that you've learned a lot of information that you weren't aware of before. I hope that you will share this with your family and your friends. I look forward to seeing you on Facebook, and it's facebook.com/vaccineinfo is where our growing family of friends are there. We'll have a new website that you'll be able to get more information and be able to look at our products, look at our new books, and be participating in our new blog real soon. Thank you very much.